Just as we start out every interview, for the record, could you please state your name, your full name, and spell your name for us?
Cheryl Ann Sedler Allen, CHERYANN, SEDLERALLEN.
Great, and where do you currently live?
I live in Fort Myers, Florida.
And what brings you to the Lighthouse today?
I was fortunate enough to make your acquaintance through Jeff Lane, who is like an unbrother to me because his older sister is my best friend since early. And I am always anxious to make sure that my parents, who did so much work here at the Lighthouse and had so much love for it, are remembered.
So how did you come to live at Presque Lighthouse, and who lived with you?
There was an ad, a very small ad in the Erie Times newspaper. It was put in by the Cleveland Coast Guard people. At that time, I believe the Erie Coast Guard was under Cleveland as a larger facility. And they needed someone to live here because it had been vacant for some time, and there were a lot of issues with young kids getting in, and there were some problems on the yard. They wanted it to be lived in so that there would always be someone here.
So when your family first arrived, can you describe what the Lighthouse looked like and maybe what structures were on the property?
The Lighthouse had been in a little bit of disrepair, and that's not going toward anyone that didn't know that. It was old. It hadn't been updated on a regular basis. It hadn't been cared for on a regular basis. But when we moved in, we redid all the floors. All the wood floors were original in the house, and we redid those. And all the woodwork was redone. It was stripped and then repainted. There was we're upstairs now on the second floor, and my father decided that we needed to have a 3/4 bath, so he put the shower and the toilet and the sink in. And some of the things we discovered in the outbuildings were the original window boxes from the Lighthouse. So two of my aunts who worked at a florist and at a greenhouse were very good with their green thumbs, and they restored them, and they were always planted. And in the winter we put plastic things in them, but we had something there all the time, so that was really fun to do. The property was in pretty good shape. The groundskeepers from the park itself had kept the grounds doing well. They knew about things such as putting up a fence to keep out the sand during the winter, because our harsh winters not just bring in snowfall and blowing wind, but inside that snow is sand, and you can lose the grass out here very quickly, as another resident found out later on. We had outbuildings of the oil house, which is still here on property, and it was in pretty good repair, but we asked for permission and were granted, and we repainted. They scraped it and repainted it to make it even nicer. We used it for some of our outside things, at first our barbecue grills and that type of thing. There were some outbuildings in the back that were originally from when that lighthouse was built, and one of those became a guest house. My father refurbished the inside of it with permission at that time it was Mike Wargo, who's our superintendent here. And Michael, I think, was here 41 years. You can check my years on that, but somewhere around there. He was here for a very long time. He loved this place also, and he lived on the bay side of the park. So my father redid that, and he put in a small bathroom and a little kitchenette, and he air conditioned it and put a bed out there, and they would go out there in the summer and stay, and my brothers and I would remain in here.
So before you moved in, what was your knowledge of Presque Lighthouse, if you had any of it?
Actually, we had quite a bit. My mother grew up on the lake. As children, we had a cottage on Lake Erie. We had boats. We came to the peninsula every Sunday that was possible. My grandfather and my grandmother would bring us. As many of the grandchildren, there are 17 total at that time, but as many as were available would come out here. We would be here when the park opened at 6 a.m. And my grandfather would give us each a paper bag, and he'd tell us to go pick up trash. And we'd say, "But Grandpa, we didn't even unpack our picnic baskets. We don't have any trash." He said, "There's trash here. It may not be ours, but we don't want it on the park." So we would do that, and we'd come back in about a half an hour, and we would have some cigarette butts or maybe empty lotion bottle from suntan lotion, and we would bring that back, and by that time we'd have a fire going, and we would have pancakes and bacon and eggs, and we would literally stay all day. For lunch we would just have sandwiches, And if you were very, very young and you couldn't walk, he would tie a rope around you and put a stake out so you could get to the water's edge, put your fingers and toes in, but you weren't going to drown. And then we also had a buddy system, so every one of the cousins had to be buddies with someone else. You had to hold hands, even the boys, which 6 and 7-year-old boys don't like to hold hands, I get that, but they did. And he would teach us all to swim. And when we learned to swim, then we would go to the bayside sometimes, and we would go out in his boat. And first we had to go in the canoe, then we had to go in the rowboat. And then we'd come back to the lake and put the rowboat in the lake until we learned to do all the different types of rowing and canoeing with the paddles. And then we could actually put the 5-horsepower motor on the back of the rowboat and take it out. So we literally grew up here.
So when you first moved in, I'm curious what your first impressions were like, and as you lived here, if you could just describe for us what it was like to live at Presque Lighthouse.
When we opened the door to come in, my mother just took this huge breath. It was her dream to be here. It became our castle. It became her kingdom, not my father's, but hers. Although my father played the organ, we had an organ here, and at night he would play the organ, and there would be people on the beach, and they could hear him playing the organ through the open windows. It was really not too bad, considering that within my family, my aunts and my uncles, they all had some skill to help. It was knob and tubing wire throughout the place, which was in 1969, or 65, you don't want to have that. So my uncle, who worked as an electrician at the Erie Forge and Steel for 41 years, he changed all the electric out. My other uncle at the time worked for Gentel, and he did all the telephone lines. My aunts, as I previously said, did the windows and did all the plantings around, so we made sure we had something that was native to the park. We didn't bring something else in. But it looked fine, except that there was a bit of dung from the bats in the fireplace flue. So we had to open that up, and luckily my one aunt worked with the people up at the zoo. She called them and knew that they probably wanted it. They did. They were real happy. They came down, and together they emptied out about 4 feet of it, which makes great fertilizer for their plantings up there. So they took it to the zoo. So it solved 2 problems. We got rid of the bats and the dung, and the zoo was happy and we were happy. We had a couple of windows to replace that were broken, but otherwise everything could be done within my family.
That's great. I know your family had also added some additions to the Lighthouse property here. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, as we sit on the 2nd floor, there was no bath, and there are 2 bedrooms, so my brothers shared the one room and I shared the other, or I had the other. And so my father built a 3/4 bath, just a shower, no tub, but with a sink and the toilet. And it was fabulous. My uncles also helped on that because my other uncle was a plumber and he was also a flooring person. So my uncle from Ohio, my Uncle John, he helped us do the flooring. And we put some carpet down, but for the most part we used the wooden floors because they were the originals. And we were very cautious about not wanting to make it into what you'd say a modern home. We wanted to be able to showcase the fact that it had been built well, and because they built it so well, it was still able to be lived in from the 1700s to the 1900s.
And what about on the property here? Did your family change anything about that?
We did. My brother, who was 6'5", that's Bobby, he played basketball for McDowell, so my father and uncles built him a half-court basketball court so he could practice. And then we loved to barbecue, and all of my relatives lived in Erie except one aunt and uncle and their 4 children, but they just lived over in Mentor, Ohio, so they would come over at least 2 weekends a month. Everyone would come and sleep here. There'd be people all over. The kids slept outside, and they built a barbecue grill, and it was probably 8 feet long and 3 feet wide because my uncle liked to do pigs and goats, and we liked to do ribs, and we were feeding 36 people plus friends. So yes, so we built that as well. And then my father, as I said, took the one house and he made it into the guest house, so that was a lot of fun. We built a back room, which we called the sunroom, and it was all windows so that we could be out there 12 months a year. It had a stove in it, a Franklin stove that was not original. It actually came from the hardware store at 26th and Peninsula. But it was really fun to be out there. It was like sitting in nature without being cold.
Are there any days living out of Presque or any notable events on the peninsula that kind of stick out in your mind while you were living here?
Well, they say that there was a alien ship who landed over near what we used to call the police station. You call it the ranger station, I believe now. And it just happened that there were two young people there late in their car. I'm sure they were chatting and talking, listening to the radio. And they said they saw it land, heard it first and saw it land. It was investigated by a number of people, including the Air Force people, the UFO people who came out of Nevada, I believe. And they pretty much agreed that something had been there that was either a U.S. questionable thing that no one knew about, or it could have been aliens. It was never proven, but we had a lot of fun with it, and a number of people believed it, and there's no reason to think that we are the only people in the universe.
Were you out here at the Lighthouse or on the peninsula when that happened?
We were here. My parents were gone. My one aunt and uncle, my uncle the electrician, and his wife, my Aunt Jean, were here. And so, yes, we experienced that, and we all said, why not?
Because of the time of year, kind of segueing a little bit, I do have to ask, we have a lot of guests that come in and ask about if there are any supernatural experiences or presences here. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
No, if they're talking about ghosts or things in the house, no. We did not do any of that, but we will share with you that there were times when we would see lights out over the lake. And they did seem to come on, so we could see them through the lakeside windows. And we felt like someone was coming to visit. They didn't seem to be terrorizing us, or you didn't feel sad about it or bad about it. But there would be a number of lights that we would see.
Interesting. What do you think they were?
Well, in today's world, they might have been considered drones. They weren't drones then. So we're not sure what they were. They could have been weather balloons, which would be very natural because they do a lot of looking at the weather over the Great Lakes. But it was never explained, and more than just my family witnessed them. So
interesting, very interesting. Any other moments, even mundane, I guess, everyday things that you loved about your time at the Lighthouse here?
Every day was a happy day. My mother, as I said, this was her place to be. And she would get up in the morning and she just wanted to go for a bike ride. She wasn't going to work. My parents did work. But she wanted to go for a bicycle ride or hike or swim. We would search for glass very often. And because she grew up on the bayfront, and then the rest of us all grew up on the lakefront, including a cottage in Mill Creek, we would always go and search for certain stones. And there are some shells in Lake Erie, not a lot, but there are some that come in, so we would do that. And then it would be getting late in the day, and it would be getting dark, but my mother would say, oh, look, we still have a half an hour of light. We can take a bike ride. So down we would go toward the opposite end and get back in time, hopefully, but we'd always take a flashlight just in case we didn't. But the days and the nights here were just beautiful, even in the storms. In all 4 seasons, there was this presence of nature, and you were living right in the middle of it. When the snow came across the lake, when the rain came across the lake, as the summers came, we would watch the lake levels rise and fall, not like the tides of the oceans, but the lake levels do on their own go up and down, depending upon the snowfall that they get in the very upper lakes that travels down to us. And so we had a boat. We were here when they started to build the marina, and then we put our boat in the marina here on Presque Isle, and it was here for a very long time. So every day, we were very, very fortunate and very blessed to live a place that most people just get to visit. So we were here 24/7. And then one of the sparkling things that happened was during one of the storms in the winter, one of the does was killed. We think she starved to death, truthfully, but she bore a fawn. And my brother found her in the early spring, and she was skin and bones. She didn't know how to forage for herself and eat. And he brought her over here. We let the Game Commission know, and they said that was fine. And he walked her on a leash like you'd walk a dog, and he would take her he had a name for her, and he would take her down to the beach and walk, and people would think, well, someone decided that wasn't what they should be doing. And so they took her away and put her at the zoo. And I think they both pretty much had broken hearts, and she died not long after that.
A lot of all kinds of memories out here.
All kinds of memories. And, the perch, we would have, once a month, we would have a perch fry, because my uncles and aunts all fished, and so we would get to the point where they had 100, 200 fish, and then they would be ready to go on the grill, and we'd have a fish fry. So those were great days.
Yeah, sounds like you had some great dinners out here.
We had some fabulous dinners out here. Yes, you never just fed the five of us. There was always someone else here. So, and the lifeguards also played a part, because it used to be no one wanted to go to Lighthouse Beach. That was wasn't where the girls were, and it wasn't where the tunes were. And then they were sent the newbies down here. So my mother would take them out hot chocolate and chocolate chip cookies on a Saturday, or chili or whatever, or she'd take them out a Coke in the summer. Well, then they started to hear, wow, you should go to the Lighthouse. Mrs. Sedler will feed you. So then they were vying to come here, and they actually had at one time 2 chairs here instead of just one, because it became a popular beach for families. And I have high school friends whose families still come out here every single year, sit on the sand dunes out here with the lighthouse in the background so they can take their family photos.
Seems like it's always been a gathering spot for
Absolutely.
People and families.
Absolutely, yes. And then, fast forward, we weren't permitted to live here anymore. Someone else moved in, the commandant from Cleveland. But later on, there was a man here in the 1990s, Matt Marcinick, and he was on the staff as a ranger on the park, and he lived here. And he did some wonderful research. I never did research on it. It was just my privilege to live here. But Matt did a lot of research, and that's a person you should probably seek out. The last I knew, he was in Whitefish, Montana, but I haven't been able to find him. So he's somewhere, I'm sure, still doing the same things he was doing.
So do you mind clarifying what year your family moved in, and then the year?
1965 to 1972.
And did you know any of the other Lighthouse residents, either before? I know you had mentioned Matt, that you...
We met Matt. My father was still alive. He met Matt. My mother had already passed. We met him through a mutual friend from Edinburgh. And then Loretta, we met when the Lighthouse was turned over to the state, because she had lived here as a very young girl versus I lived here as a teenager. And my brothers actually went to school from here. The Coast Guard van would stop here at the Lighthouse in the morning, take them up to 6th Street, where the Mill Creek buses would pick them up and take them on.
We spoke to Loretta, and she... I'm just curious, in your conversations, how do you think your experience here compares with hers? And of course, it'd be different, being different ages growing up here.
Exactly. I think that they felt more isolated. I believe that was the word she used when we spoke, that because the park wasn't quite as busy back then as it became later on. But I think she enjoyed it as a child. She had the run of the sand dunes and the beach and everything else. When we lived here, the park was probably at its largest attendance ever, for a number of different reasons. It had been highlighted more in the newspaper, highlighted more on the radio, highlighted on television. We had some emissaries that went down to Harrisburg and spoke about it, and so we had people coming from the other side of the state that we didn't always get. And then when they started to look at, well, how many state parks can you visit in Pennsylvania? How many do we have? We should see them all. I think that became a focal point for more people to come up here. Because not all our state parks have water. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. And so to come up here on the Great Lake, that's really a wonderful time to come here.
So I'm curious what your thoughts were when the Lighthouse transitioned to a museum historical organization. What are your feelings about that?
I think we had very mixed emotions. I wasn't sure that was the best next step for it. I think it's a home that needs to be lived in 24/7. I still feel that way. I'm grateful that the museum took over and has done some wonderful things to preserve. But a house is a house unless it's a home. It can only be a home if someone lives here. And to have someone living and breathing in it every single day, I think still would be very good for the lighthouse itself. And you wouldn't buy it, you would continue to rent it. Now you'd rent from the state rather than from the federal government. But I do really believe that is the way it should go. You could still have your things you have outside, you could still have people come through. And we had people knock on our doors sometimes asking, and we had a privacy sign up, but if they came up and asked, we would let them come in, we would let them go through the yard. You want to preserve it as much as possible, and I think, as I said, a house is only a home if there are people residing in it.
Thank you for sharing that. I had a question, and it slipped out of my mind. Kind of on that same vein, though, what does a lighthouse mean to you? And, of course, guests that come and visit, what do you hope that they walk away with after visiting the lighthouse? What feelings do you hope they walk away with, or any kind of information?
Oh my. Well, I was just at the Navy Jazz Concert Band on Sunday with some friends, and I ran into an old high school friend that I haven't seen in probably 30 years, and he was with his significant other. And he said to her, I used to go out there and her mother could cook up a storm at the drop of a hat. But he said, when you went in, you felt like, moment. The peace of the lake, the peace of the house itself, because there's not really ever been violence in the house to my knowledge. People who would come in would say they just felt like they went to a spa, a mental spa. Because everything around you, from the birds singing to hearing the fish jump in the water to the waves lapping, it just does such gentle things to your body and to your spirit. And I was real happy to hear Jim Hurtner, my friend, say that after all these years, because he hasn't been here since we were teenagers. And I'm sure that Jeff Lane would say the same thing when he would come out here with his younger brothers. I'm still in touch with all of them. His sister is still one of my very best friends. We would just come out, we would have campfires. As I said, my cousins, especially the boys, would bring their sleeping bags. It could be 90 degrees out there with mosquitoes as big as your arm, but they would sleep out there because they wanted to be under the stars. And we would have a campfire. Oh, we also had a pig pit. Forgot to mention that. We had a pig pit, yes, because my uncle liked to do that. And so we built a pig pit, and it was lined with the leaves that come out of Hawaii. And so once a month we also had a pig roast. So yes, we did. Food was a mainstay for us, and it made everyone, very happy and come together. And everyone would bring things, and we would coexist with that. And we would start the pig pit the night before, and the boys would stay out there to stoke the fire, and then we'd be ready to put the pig in the morning, and then we'd eat at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening. So, and then the merry-go-round. I brought you pictures of the merry-go-round. The merry-go-round was a piece that came out of the original McCain Elementary School when they tore it down. They got all new playground equipment when they built the new school. And one of my father's friends, Ed Belinsky from McCain, he said to my dad, they were always horse trading something. I'll give you that merry-go-round if you give me that small trailer you have. So they traded, and he brought it out. And then at Church in Murdoch, who's still building, I believe, in Erie right now. Al Church was a friend of my father's as well. And he said, you can't just put it in the sand. It's too dangerous. It will tip over. So he brought out not 1, but 2 truckloads of cement. And that is why they had such a difficult time removing it from the property, which I think they should have left it, because it would have been something for young children to be on when it was here. It was completely safe. But that was the story of the merry-go-round. It was an antique. It was one of those you sat on and you pumped and pulled to go around. And not just the kids that would go on, even my grandmother went on it. So
Family affair.
Family affair for sure, yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about your time at the Lighthouse, or something you wish people knew about the Lighthouse?
It's living history of the Erie area. I really, if they've never been here, I would hope that they would come to see it. They can touch the bricks outside, and they can take themselves all the way back to the brick people who did that. And one of the things is the chimney here was repointed by my father and my uncles, because my uncle also did bricklaying. So we had all of the trades covered, and they redid that, and they redid the roof and the windows everything was updated to make it as safe as possible for people to come. And we just enjoyed it. It would be like anyone choosing where their favorite place would be in the world. Whether it's high on a mountain, whether it's on a beach, whether it's in the Amazon River. That's what this was to my family, to my parents, to my brothers, to all my cousins who still remember it, and my aunts and uncles. They poured themselves and the love of the Lighthouse into the work that they help us do here.
Well, that's great, Cheryl. Thank you so much. I think we're all set here, but we'll, take our walk through the house and
Okay.
we'll see it through your eyes.
Yes, I hope so. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah. Thanks, Rosie.
And thank you, Rosie. All right.
I was very moved
Yeah.
by a lot of your answers.
That was.
It's emotional for me to walk in here, I will tell you. It brings tears to my eyes, happy tears, because it was. My father never swore. No, and my mother hardly swore, but once in a while she'd say, damn, and my father would say, no, not acceptable. My father was in the Army Air Corps, got out before it became the Air Force.
Okay.
And so he was a pilot, we had a plane. And they enjoyed life so much, I can't even begin to tell you. And my mother was very ill with a very rare disease, and she knew she wasn't going to last very long. So she wanted to make sure every day had every day had a happy person, and every day had a happy event. And that's how she looked at it. So we did things that made her happy and then made us happy in the end.
Oh, yeah, that's so moving.
It really is.
And and my brothers were like,
my gosh.
my one brother's the mountain man, the one who passed away already, and he's the one who found the fawn. He could go out there, he'd be out there 12 hours. It didn't make any, and my parents were never afraid he'd be lost.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the police people here, Danny Descanio was the chief. They couldn't have been nicer, kinder. And you had to sign in when you came in order to come home, like from a date or if we were away.
Right. I
to
remember
sign
you
in.
explaining that.
Those records, I believe, are available to you. I think they have to keep them by law. So that would also give you a look at who all has come to the peninsula after dark. People going to the
That would be
marina
very
for the boats,
interesting. Mm-hmm.
people coming here, and people from the Coast Guard station. And again, the Coast Guard people we got along with very well. So we go down and that they didn't have the new barracks then. They had the old ones. Now they have the newer barracks. But we would ride our bicycles all over here. It'd be nothing for us to take a 13-mile bike ride and then come back and start dinner.
Right.
So, but yeah, we can do a walkthrough for sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this is Bobby and Dennis's room here.
Should we organize as we go?
Yeah, sure.